Dear colleagues, please take your seats and we will start. So take your seats, please. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to welcome... Please sit down. We have just started the hearing. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Jørgensen, Commissioner Designate for Energy and Housing, and everyone else in the room or watching us on the web stream to this joint hearing organized by the ITRE and EMPL committees. I would like also to welcome the members of the two committees jointly responsible for this hearing, the members from the four invited committees. I wish to particularly welcome Ms. Lee Anderson, chair of the EMPL committee, with whom I will co-chair this hearing. I will now make some procedural remarks. The Committee on Legal Affairs has raised no objection to the holding of this hearing. We acknowledge Mr. Jørgensen's readiness to cooperate with the European Parliament. This is important in the context of the revision of framework agreement between Parliament and the Commission, in particular regarding his engagement to be regularly present in committees and plenaries, to follow up on Parliament's legislative initiatives and to timely share information with Parliament as co-legislator and arm of the budgetary authority. We count on the full implementation of these commitments and emphasize the Commissioner's role as an honest broker ensuring equal treatment of Parliament and the Council. We equally count on his full cooperation to inform our committees in advance of all upcoming proposals, which detail justifications for those requiring urgent actions. I will now hand back to the chair of EMPL committee to explain the structure of the confirmation hearing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Budka. I look forward to co-chairing this joint confirmation hearing with you. Let me also welcome, on behalf of the EMPL committee and on my own, the Commissioner designate. Today's hearing will be structured as follows. Mr. Jørgensen will make an opening statement no longer than 15 minutes. He will also have 5 minutes at the end for a closing statement. We will have 4 rounds of questions and answers. The first round of political group coordinators with 5 minutes slots each, with 1 minute for question and 2 minutes for the answer, with the possibility of a follow-up question from the same member, no longer than 1 minute, with 1 minute for the reply. Then a second round of questions with 3-minute slots each by other members. Third round of questions by the chairs of invited committees with 3-minute slots each. And a final round of questions by members, also with 3-minute slots each. All slots of 3 minutes will be divided into 1 minute for a question and 2 minutes for the answer from the Commissioner designate. And in order to ensure the smooth running of the hearing, both chairs will be very strict with the speaking time, also with the only 1 minute for the question. And you will see a star 10 seconds before the time is up. Interpretation is provided in all 23 languages, and without further ado, we will proceed now with the confirmation hearing, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jørgensen for his opening statement.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Honourable members of the Parliament, it is truly an honour and a pleasure to be here with you today, back at the European Parliament. I'm sure you all know the feeling when sometimes a sound or a scent or something you see will spark a memory that will transport you back in time, sometimes decades. And you know exactly how you felt when that happened to you. I have a very vivid memory like that every time I walk up Rue Vierge towards the European Parliament. It takes me back 22 years. An autumn day when I was walking towards the Parliament, about to start my first day as a trainee. I still remember the butterflies in my stomach. I have a few of them today also, I have to admit. But more importantly, I felt like I was a part of something very, very important. Now, I said this to a friend of mine earlier today, and she said, well, looked at me with a straight face, maybe in 20 years, you'll think back at this day and this hearing whenever you see a pack of lions. I assured her that I do not think it will come to that. I know what to expect. As many of you know, I also served as a member of this Parliament for almost 10 years. So I used to be one of the lions, so to speak. It is your job to scrutinize me. It's your job to hold me responsible. It's your job to ask the difficult questions. I respect that. You are the voices of the citizens. I know you take that very seriously, as do I. Now, before I start talking about my portfolio, I want to share with you 4 principles that, if I am approved, hope can and will guide my work as a commissioner. 1, we need structural changes. The challenges that we face are so big, so challenging, that no easy fixes will do. We need real, long-lasting solutions. 2, at the same time though, we need to deliver tangible results here and now, fast, that everybody, all citizens of Europe, can feel in their everyday life. 3, we need to put people first. This means listening to their concerns, take them seriously. If we don't, it can threaten the EU project itself. We saw it with Brexit, and we've seen it with the rise of anti-EU sentiments in some member states. 4th, we need to be inclusive. Brussels can never become a bubble. This means that we must seek actively the engagement of our citizens, of our NGOs, civic society, companies, industry, labor unions, and include them in our decision-making. Now, these are 4 important principles that I hope you will agree with. Turning to my portfolio. First, energy. Energy policy is at the core of almost all of the important challenges that we face today in Europe. It's about competitiveness, jobs and growth. It's about security, helping Ukraine win the war, becoming independent of Russian fuel. It's about fighting climate change. It's about social justice. These challenges and problems overlap, and so does the solutions. So, let me first share with you my analysis of these problems before I offer some answers and some prospects for the future. In my many meetings with many of you, one thing has been put to my attention by you more frequently than any other: the high energy prices. And I agree with you. We do have a challenge. Our industry is suffering. They are paying 2 or 3 times as much for the energy as their competitors in the US and China. Our households are suffering. ordinary people are struggling to pay their bills. This will not stand. So, if I am approved as Commissioner, I will make it a top priority to bring down the prices of energy for our industry, for our people. One of the reasons the prices has gone up is obviously the war in Ukraine. And although we are at a much better place now than we were in the first months of the crisis, we are still not where we need to be. We used to get 45% of our gas from Russia. Now we're down to 18%. But 18% is still too much. We need to be 100% independent on Russian fuel. The third challenge I will mention is climate change. 75% of EU's greenhouse gases comes from energy. President von der Leyen has called the European Green Deal our answer to the call of history. I agree, and we need to continue this important work. There's no room for backtracking. On the contrary, we are in the middle of a process of fundamentally transforming the way we produce and consume energy. And if we do it right, we will strengthen our competitiveness and it will make us more prosperous. So this is the vision, and I believe it is possible. But not all Europeans will automatically feel that a green and clean transition is necessarily good for them. As a matter of fact, I know that some will worry. Some will be concerned. Will I lose my job? Will I need new skills? Am I up for it? Who will help me? These concerns are legitimate. We need to listen to them, and we need to have very concrete, very tangible answers to the questions. Now, let me turn to the other part of my portfolio, housing. I want to start by thanking you, the Parliament, for bringing this topic so high on the agenda. One of you said to me that at the election campaign this summer in his country, 3 topics were on the top of the agenda: housing, housing, and housing. Now, I know this differs from country to country, but there is no doubt that housing is something that concerns our citizens. It's something they worry about, and it's something that we need to take seriously. Right now, far too many Europeans struggle to find an affordable place to live. Prices of both buying and renting have gone up, affecting millions. This is unacceptable. It is the right of all citizens in the European Union to have an affordable, sustainable, and decent home. At the same time, many Europeans experience energy poverty. Again, totally unacceptable. Obviously, a lot of these challenges need to be addressed in the member states. But there are things we can do, and there are things we will do from a European level. So, what to do about all these problems? It is clear that we live in a time of multiple interlinked crises. It's a tall order. The challenges may seem daunting, I think, to many, but I'm confident that we can mitigate them. Let me be concrete. If I am approved Commissioner, I will propose measures that will bring down the energy costs for our industry to strengthen the competitiveness of our companies and, at the same time, help bring down the bills for our households. I will do this as a part of a strategy to decarbonize our economy. And I will do it in a way where we will become 100% independent of Russian energy. How? Well, the first we need to do is deploy more renewable energy and more energy efficiency efforts. To do that, we need all tools in the toolbox, including expanding and strengthening grids and interconnectors, boosting digitalization, helping overcome supply chain problems, cutting red tape and bureaucracy, facilitating faster and more efficient permitting, boosting new technologies for energy storing, supporting carbon capture and storage and usage technology, supporting the development of hydrogen and power-to-X solutions. Many of you have asked me also about nuclear energy. So let me underline that yes, nuclear is and will continue to be an integrated part of the European energy mix. And yes, it is a part of the solution to decarbonize the European energy system. We will work fast, and already within the first 100 days, the Commission will present a clean industrial deal. This will include an action plan for affordable energy. And also, within the first 100 days, I will put forward a roadmap towards ending Russian energy import. Later will follow, among other things, a clean energy investment plan and an electrification action plan. On housing, the first thing I will do if I am approved as the first ever EU Commissioner for Housing is to start a dialogue, not only with you and the other EU institutions, that's important, but with all relevant stakeholders in the housing sector. On the basis of this, I will put forward the first of its kind European Affordable Housing Plan. This plan will include a strategy for housing construction, a pan-European investment platform in collaboration with the EIB, efforts to upskill and reskill workers, efforts to facilitate knowledge sharing and technical assistance. Apart from that, the Commission will double our funding in the Cohesion Fund for housing and reform state aid rules as to better enable support measures for social housing and energy efficiency in our member states. Now, allow me to summarize. We live in a time of many interlinked crises: a competitiveness crisis, a security crisis, a climate crisis, and a housing crisis. To address these challenges, to solve these problems, we need to make decisions guided by the principles I mentioned earlier. We need to make comprehensive, long-lasting structural change. No quick fixes will do. At the same time, we need to move fast and provide tangible results that all Europeans can see and feel here and now in their own lives. And the solutions need to put people first, and they need to be made in an inclusive way via outreach and dialogue. It will not be easy, but it can be done. Let's do it together. Honourable members, this concludes my introduction. I can honestly say that I look forward to the next couple of hours. I am being honest. I promise. Mr. Ehler said that's the only lie. No. I assure you. And I also assure you that I will promise to do my utmost to answer all of your questions as best I can. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we start the first round. So please, our coordinators, the political groups, representatives, to remember that we've got 5 minutes for each group. And in the name of EPP, Christian Eller.
First of all, welcome to the Parliament. The realistic news is that you're going to spend a lot of time in the next 5 years with this Commission. And I think, as we said in the morning to your colleague, yes, we like to be addressed as lions and for the gender equality as lionesses, but this is a hearing and not a tribunal. But we have a lot of questions. And my first one would be the European industry is under great pressure. As it loses in these days, really, its competitiveness. And from the EPP perspective, the EU Green Deal has been all about green, but not about a deal. The Fit for 55 package in particular has invented a lot of targets and regulation that both the energy sector and the industry have to comply with. However, this term must be all about implementation and a realistic approach towards these goals. Regarding the implementation of the 2030 Energy and Climate Framework, how do you plan to ensure that competitiveness remains central to achieving these targets, particularly through the efficient and realistic application of the literally hundreds of delegated and implementing acts that follows from Fit for 55 alone? How do you foresee the involvement of stakeholders, particularly industry, in the implementation of the 2030 framework, for example, in an institutionalized setting like with the Sevilla process?
Mr. Ehler, thank you so much for that question. It is extremely relevant. So, if any of you don't know this, the industry in Europe is under pressure, and I would recommend you to read the Draghi report. It states very clearly that if we don't move, and if we don't move fast, we risk losing on the global stage. Energy prices is not the only factor, but it's a big factor. Companies in Europe pay 2 to 3 times more for their energy than the competitors in the US and China. So a very important part of solving this problem is to make sure that our companies have access to more clean and cheap energy. But there's also other things. They're interrelated, but sometimes they're also separate. To have more access to energy, cheaper energy, doesn't necessarily mean that we also need to make more rules. At the opposite, actually. Sometimes we need to simplify. And I think that we need to be extremely cautious that we don't keep rules just because they're there, just because they build on something we already made. On the contrary, I will commit to a burden reduction in line with the Commission's target of reducing by 25% in general and 35% for small and medium enterprises specifically. I will also look at whatever we can do in the implementation process to listen to stakeholders. And yes, Mr. Ehler, I will also commit to a process. Exactly how we will manage and structure this process is probably a little bit too early to say, but it's very important for me to listen to industry and other stakeholders in implementation before 2030, but also, by the way, moving on from 2030 and onwards. Now, I will be very happy to also go into more detail on what can then actually be done with regards to making our electricity market design work better, follow up on some of the recommendations from Draghi on, for instance, decoupling of the prices so that the price of electricity doesn't necessarily follow the price of fossils, but I can maybe do that in the follow-up if you want.
My follow-up question would go in the same direction. As Commissioner Designate, you are tasked with focusing on significantly reducing administrative burden and simplifying implementation. The Commission so far claims success in implementing the one-in, one-out principle, which maintains the status quo. However, in order to effectively reduce administrative burden for business, which to a large extent is regulatory burden, would you agree that more regulations and regulatory obligations should go out than new ones come in? Do you agree that the one-in, one-out methodology needs to be revised to better account for costs as well as balance impact on specific industries? Would you commit to ensure a significant reduction of regulatory burden for businesses, both from the energy sector and the industrial sectors, stemming from EU legislation, either by applying this principle or by any alternative measures which would effectively and measurably lead to such reduction?
As I said initially, I share your ambition that we need to fundamentally reduce the burdens on our industry. I do also adhere to the one-in, one-out principle. I will, however, say that maybe we need to be careful and mindful not to be too simplistic. I'm not at all implying that you are, Mr. Ehler. I'm just saying that it's not only about quantity, it's also about quality. Now, let me give you a good example of where some things have been done, but more can be done. With regards to permitting, really, when you think about it, it really is a huge problem that in Europe, where we need clean energy, cheap energy, we have projects ready to start. But because contractors need to wait sometimes up to 7 years for an onshore wind approval of the permitting, it doesn't go online. This is 100% unacceptable. We have made new rules for this. They have also been implemented, but to a very different degree from country to country. Germany, your own country, Mr. Ehler, is a country that's done well, where it's actually, as I understand it, meant that times for permitting has gone considerably down. We need to do much more of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Gabrielle Bischoff.
Jørgensen here. I mean, as you said, if confirmed, you will be the first ever EU housing commissioner, and that is a key priority for my group, but also many others in this house, because the housing crisis at the moment is really affecting millions of people all over Europe, with ramping house prices, explosion of rents, often make it impossible to find a decent, affordable house to live. One key priority to increase investment from our point of view is the question, how do you intend to close the investment gap for affordable housing? We know that of 57 billion euro per year, according to Commission data, is necessary as investment, and to boost private and public investment in decent, sustainable, affordable housing. And how will you make sure that public funds really address the housing needs of vulnerable as well as all low and middle income groups, because they are all affected? Can you commit also to include some conditionality criteria or to earmarking certain funds to achieve these goals?
Thank you so much, Mrs. Bishop, for those questions. It is indeed an area that this Parliament as a whole, but your group especially, has been working very hard on for a long time. So thank you for that. You are right. We are in a situation where the lack of affordable housing is imminent. 8.9% of the European population spend 40% or more of their disposable income on cost for living. Yeah. This is far too many. And that's not including, of course, the millions of people, presumably, that are looking for somewhere to live but cannot find it. So they're forced to stay at home with their parents. They cannot move to follow their dreams, find the job that they want, and so forth, because they cannot, as young people, afford to invest in a home. Apart from that, of course, is the problem of energy poverty that I hope we'll speak more about today also. Huge problem and totally unacceptable. So it's about making the cost of living more affordable for people. That is why we will present an affordable housing plan. We will be very inclusive in the process, speaking to all stakeholders in the housing sector ecosystem, working very closely with the Parliament, also building on the own initiative report that you have adopted, which I think has a lot of very good points and recommendations in it. And a very important part of this plan will indeed be, as you pointed to, the lack of investment. So I guess your question to me is, how do we bridge the gap? Well, I need to be quite honest and say the EU will not be able to bridge that gap alone. But there are things we can do, and we will make a pan-European investment platform together with the EIB. We will provide some funding via the Cohesion Fund, and we will reform state aid rules that will also help spark more investments in especially social housing in many member states.
I I would like to come back to the last point you did. Reforming state aid rules is very important indeed, but for us it's also important to allow investment in public housing here. What are the positions here? It goes beyond social housing. And also, if I have one last chance and some seconds left, how you intend to end harmful speculation in the housing market in terms also of certain tools or legislation. Thank you very much.
Yes, so when looking at the state aid rules, this is exactly one of the areas we need to evaluate. How to make sure that the state aid helps social housing, but also what does that then actually mean? Is that then only the most vulnerable groups? Certainly it's them, but is it also a little bit broader than that? And how can we do it without distorting the entire market? But these are at the top of my agenda. I will be working, of course, very closely with Executive Vice President and the debater on this. On the question of speculation, it's clear that homes have become a commodity, thereby also something that can be speculated in. Now, the coin has two sides. On one hand, we do need investors to put money in the housing sector, but I fear that too often they look at short-term gains, profits, and not necessarily at what is best for societies and long-term investments. So I will be working with my colleague, Commissioner Albuquerque, on looking at what we can do from a European side in the financial markets to remedy this situation. Also, of course, advising as best we can member states on the things that they can do, because, of course, primarily this will be a national competency.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Paolo Borchia.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. Good afternoon, Mr. Jørgensen. I'm here hidden by the camera. Well, nuclear power is emerging as an increasingly viable option for the stability and the decarbonization of the European energy system, particularly given the growing demand for electricity. President von der Leyen, in her mission letter to you, mentions the role of small modular reactors, but this technology is still under development with uncertain implementation timelines, and SMRs cannot immediately compensate for the loss of capacity from traditional reactor sets to close in the coming years. Considering that the scientific community estimates the need for at least 100 gigawatts of new large capacity reactors in order to maintain system reliability, I ask you, what measures will you adopt, if you will, of course, to promote the installation of larger, already tested nuclear reactors? Thank you.
So, to help develop and deploy small modular reactors in Europe is a part of my mission letter. It's also clear that it is a new technology. It is not on market yet. The ambition is to have the first examples of small modular reactors in Europe in the early 30s. Whether or not that is feasible is probably too early to say, but that is the ambition. The way that we will work from the Commission side, and especially, of course, me as the responsible commissioner on this, is to listen very closely to the European Industry Alliance on Small Modular Reactors that are right now working on an analysis of what are the problems, what are the possible challenges, and what can be done from a political level to help overcome those challenges. One thing that I will already mention now that I think needs to be in focus is that we need to avoid making us dependent on fuels, of course, but also spare parts and other things from outside of EU. So having a European supply chain would probably be a smart move, learning from the history in other parts of our energy system. Now, on nuclear more generally, obviously, We have right now a situation where 97 gigawatts are put online every year from nuclear energy. That will, in our projections, the Commission's projections, go down in the 40s to 88, and then come up again, so that in 2050 we will have approximately the same level as we have now, which is will be around 98 gigawatts.
Thank you. Concerning housing, let's talk about EPBD. It is estimated that its implementation will result in costs up to 1,000 billion euro for some member states. For example, in Italy, we have more than 60% of the building stock falls into the lowest energy classes. These are unbearable costs that are likely to be passed on to consumers. In your responses to the written questions, there seems to be no specific indications regarding the nature of the funding needed for the implementation on this directive. And so my question is, could you clarify if there will be any specific European funds to support this effort, or will the Commission leave it to Member States to secure the necessary resources? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borchia. You point to a very real problem. So, on one hand, there's no way around renovating our buildings and houses. Buildings are responsible for 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Houses for between 25 and 30%. So to fight climate change, that's a necessity. But it's also a necessity to bring down energy costs. And most investments in energy efficiency will pay back very, very fast. For industry, it's between 3 and 5 years in average. For houses, it's between 5 and 10 years in average. Having said that, though, I do agree with you in your statement that for the people that need to renovate their house, if they don't have the money, even though it will pay back, that is a problem. So we need to do more to help overcome that challenge. A lot has to be done on member state level, of course, but we can do things on European level. And you asked me specifically about European funding, and yes, actually already now, more than 100 billion euros has been allocated to these specific efforts. And I will, of course, not exclude that more can be allocated in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Daniel Obajtek in the name of ECR.
Szanowny panie kandydacie.
Dear Commissioner Designate, investment into sources of energy generations give us cheap energy. We all know that, and that's necessary to keep our industry competitive. And here comes my question. I would like you to reply to this question because it's very relevant when it comes to the sources of generation. Back in 2022, you said publicly that you would do the utmost for nuclear not to be considered a green source of energy. So now you have changed your mind and you will fight for it to being considered as a green energy source. That's my question. And how specifically are you going to support, small modular reactors in Europe? Please tell me specifically.
Thank you. Check. Yes, in 2022, I was a minister in Denmark. In Denmark, we are, in general, not pro-nuclear. We don't have nuclear, and I would doubt very much that we will get it. But this is indeed an area where we are united in diversity. We have it stated very clearly in the treaty that the energy mix is up to every country, and I totally respect that. And we have 12 countries now that has nuclear, around 100 plants. More might come, probably will come, and I respect that. I also think it's good that we will never be in a situation where a country like Denmark or Austria or Luxembourg will be forced to have nuclear, just as your own country will not be forced to abandon nuclear. So this is my position. I'm sure as a member of parliament, you've had colleagues and yourself that has been rapporteurs where sometimes you have one mandate and then you work for that mandate. Also, even if you may not have supported everything in that mandate in the negotiation process, you can compare that to being a minister, and you can certainly compare that to being a commissioner. I will work for the policies that are decided by the European Union. That is my job. And I will work, of course, also every day with deep respect of the treaty, and that is also the case on nuclear. Now, on small modular reactors, I did touch upon this. It is, I think, important that I do not hijack the process. If there was 10 recommendations that we could, on the table, that we could decide on tomorrow, then we would be discussing those 10 recommendations. But because industry themselves, so the ones that we want to invest in this, are still in the process of analyzing, in close collaboration with the Commission, it is too early for me to give more detail. But I can say, of course, that I will follow the instruction given by President von der Leyen in my mission letter to work hard on making this happen. Thank you.
Dear Commissioner Designate, we are analyzing it, but the Canadians are already building SMRs. I hope we're not stopping on analysis. Now on capital, it's difficult for European companies to get access to capital. American economy is developing quickly. The Chinese are developing quickly because they have access to capital. So companies are emitting CO2 and they have to pay credits for the ETS. So would you support a solution whereby zero emission investments would be deducted from ETS costs? That would be an additional incentive for developing our economy. Would you support such an idea? Thank you.
So one of the things that we will be presenting, and if I am confirmed as Commissioner, I will be presenting with colleagues, is a clean investment plan. Because we do need massive investments in our energy sector. We need it in renewables, we need it in energy efficiency, we need it in nuclear, we need it in physical infrastructure, grid capacity, interconnectors, physical infrastructure for hydrogen, for carbon. So yes, this is something that is very high on the agenda. We need to do this, in my view, in a collected, analytic way where we don't have specific plans for one sector, forgetting about the other sectors. That's why we will put forward one plan to deal with these issues. Thank you.
Mr. Christoph Grudler.
Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll speak French. Commissioner Designate, I was pleased to read that you believe that technological neutrality is a new central concept, and I'm delighted to have read that. That means that we put onto a par everything that is decarbonated, so low carbon nuclear, CCS. Now, nuclear isn't just SNR, it's also the bigger reactors, 150 gigawatts that have to be installed in Europe between now and 2050. But you were talking about clean and affordable energy, and you write that renewable energy will be less costly. Isn't there a contradiction between technology neutrality and low cost? And are you really prepared to put renewables and low carbon on a par looking at their emissions of CO2 and the cost over the whole of the life cycle, both that is for renewables and for low carbon?
Well, I think that this is actually a perfect example of us needing to apply two principles that can be in opposition to each other. One, the need for long-haul, structural, long-lasting solutions, whilst at the same time delivering on the short term. We need to be independent of Russian fuel rather tomorrow than the day after. So this is where we are now. We have an industry that cannot compete because of too high prices now. So for me to only recommend the decisions that will lead to investments that are the best for us in 10 or 20 or 30 years will not do. I need to also point to solutions that will help us now. At the same time, Mr. Grödler, I respect very much where you're coming from and the reason behind your question, because we also risk making short-term decisions that are then, in the end, will have the effects on our energy system that are counterproductive. So these are the balances we need to find. I don't think it's an impossible task. Many of the things, by the way, that we need to do will have effect both long-term and short-term. One example of that is improving our physical infrastructure. So interconnectors. Right now, I mentioned earlier how some places we have renewable energy projects that are being put to a halt because of the lack of permitting. Well, we have other places where, because energy is not flowing freely, we have energy waste. So curtailment, for instance. Germany is a front runner on many issues in green energy, but this is a place where they have a problem. I think 4% or something like this in Germany of the renewable energy is wasted due to curtailment. So expanding our grid infrastructure will help also on the short term as we plan for the long term.
Merci. Alors, pour y arriver, il faut
So we have to deploy criteria, resilience criteria and financing criteria, and we need to reduce our dependence, as you were saying. 62% of our energy is imported into Europe, not just from Russia. So we have to take our energy resources into our own hands. And are you prepared, therefore, to support clean European energy without being blue-eyed about what's going on in the other part of the world, simply wants to come along and take part and profit from our market? Are you prepared to put money behind all European energy that leads to reducing carbon?
Okay, so you, Mr. Grödler, I think I know you a little bit already, so I know you're a very polite man, so maybe I will try and translate what you're saying in a polite way to me. Are you asking me, will we get EU money to finance nuclear? Is that what you're asking? You're nodding, which is a fair question. But no, I will not be able to promise that, as you of course well know. What I will say is that look at, and this will please you, not because it's a pleasant fact, but it's just the way it is. We cannot reach our targets in Europe without nuclear. That is the way it is. If you look at IPCC, there's no scenario where we stay below 1.5 degrees without nuclear. In fact, in most of the scenarios, nuclear will go up, at least till 2050, then from 50 till 100, it's probably a little bit more of a discussion. On the other hand, I will also say that if this is what we all agree on, then we also need to agree on making sure that we do this in a rational way, that we have safety as a highest priority, that we don't become dependent on then nuclear fuel from Russia, that we have better solutions than today on the waste management, that we have a better way of integrating the energy in our systems so that it actually becomes something that makes our systems more rational instead of sometimes what we've seen examples of the opposite. Thank you.
It will be interesting now, Greens, and on behalf of Greens, Michel Bloss.
Yeah, dear Commission designate, dear colleagues, I think we are all deeply shocked by the terrible news from Spain. More than 200 people died. And this is something that we see all over Europe already this year. It's the result of a more than 2-degree warmer Europe. So we need to accelerate our efforts to tackle the climate crisis. At the same time, you said it, Europe's energy costs are too high for citizens and for the industry. To cope with both crises, we have to be faster in the rollout of renewable energy. So I ask you, Commissioner Designate, will you propose additional measures like financially supporting energy communities to meet our 2030 renewable targets? Will you use your mandate to set up an EU-wide renewable auction scheme to achieve additional 2.5% renewables for 2030? And will you make sure that the new 2040 climate and energy package will be translated into binding energy efficiency and renewable targets at the European level in order to keep the momentum and the investor certainty?
Thank you, Mr. Bloss. There was a lot of questions there, so if I don't answer them all, remind me and I'll do it in the follow-up. First of all, thank you for mentioning the terrible catastrophe that we see in Spain right now. It's almost, sometimes you see these catastrophes coming every year now. I hope we don't get used to them, because this is not normal. This should not happen. People are dying. People are losing their homes. And by the way, this is in Europe. In my previous job, I was Minister for Development and Global Climate Policy in Denmark, and I traveled a lot in Africa and vulnerable countries on this planet where climate change hits even harder. So fighting climate change is a moral imperative. So for that reason alone, there's no backtracking feasible. Having said that, the good news is that many of the things that we need to do, almost all of the things that we need to do to decarbonize our societies, are also good for our competitiveness. They will also raise the standard of living for our citizens. They will help us fight Russia. They will empower citizens, and you ask about energy communities. Well, I have to admit that when I became Minister of Energy in Denmark, I didn't even know about this concept. And I think probably in this room most people will know, but maybe not everybody following the debate in their living rooms or their offices will know. But energy communities is actually quite a success. We have around 2 million people engaged in these types of communities right now. I think it's around 10,000 of them we have. So it's a lot. It makes it possible for people to take matters into their own hands. Prosumers, I think it's called. It's a weird concept. It means people that are both producing and consuming. I've been fortunate enough to visit some of these projects myself in Denmark. And yes, so your question was, will I support it? Yes, I will. Hopefully we will also be able to fund in the future projects like this.
Well, let me use a little bit of time of my follow-up question. Please be precise on the question about binding energy efficiency and renewable targets for 2040. But as the follow-up question, you said it yourself, Russia is waging a terrible war against Ukraine. In 2023 alone, the EU bought Russian fossil fuels for $18.4 billion. You said just now that it would be better to not have them today rather than tomorrow. And you said that you will propose a roadmap to end Russian energy imports. So I ask you, from a European to a European that is supporting the Ukraine, can you commit to phasing out all Russian fossil fuels as early as next year to avoid another 3 years of tens of billions slipping into Russian coffers and financing bombs on Ukraine?
So you asked me to be specific on the possibility of new targets for 2040. And if we look at it, in my perspective, it's very, very clear that we will not reach the 90% without a massive expansion of renewable energy. So even though we're in a situation now where it's going well, 2 years ago we would put 56 gigawatts of new energy, renewable energy online every year. This year probably it will be 78. We reached a situation the first 6 months where first time ever solar and wind renewables are a larger contributor to our electricity production than fossils. So it's going in the right direction, but it's not going fast enough, and we need to know what to do beyond 2030. So yes, I am positive towards the idea of having a renewable target. I cannot commit, unfortunately, to your ask on whether or not we can be independent of Russian fuels next year. I wish I could, and if it's possible, then yes. What I can commit to is working as fast as possible to make it happen.
And in the name of the left, Leila Shaibi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Jørgensen, Commissioner Designate. Your portfolio includes the question of housing, and you have therefore a major responsibility there. You said that for the European Parliament, housing is a priority because having access by everybody to an affordable, decent home is a precondition in order to achieve the pillar of social rights. And you were delighted to see in the political guidelines set down by Mrs. van der Leyen that housing was at the heart of priorities, and delighted also to see that there was an end of a taboo, namely the taboo on state aid. Now, let me recall that back in 2011, the Netherlands was sanctioned by the European Commission on the pretext that they were investing too much in the construction of affordable housing and that this was in direct competition with the private housing market. So there's been a big change. If the European Commission is now accepting that member states can invest in housing which is affordable without having that competition dogma which gets in the way of providing that affordable housing. My colleague to S&D, you said even more clearly, and I was delighted that you said this, and this was in the written answers to the questions, but please just give me a yes or no now. Can you tell me whether, yes or no, under your responsibility, the member states will be able to invest in affordable housing without the European Commission coming and getting in the way?
But thank you, Ms. Shaibi, for this very good question. It's in my mission letter for a reason. It is something that we take serious. State aid rules are also there for a reason. I mean, it's difficult to have a common European market if we don't have state aid rules. So please don't take this signal as a signal that state aid rules won't matter in the future. Of course they will. But we've identified a problem here. I'm sure you can appreciate that when me and my colleagues speak to the lawyers, there are many good reasons of why it's difficult to do something. On the other hand, I'm convinced that it is not impossible to find a balance. Because really, for us to be in a situation now where countries that actually want to do something, that actually even have the fund to be able to do something, to help the most vulnerable parts of their population, having an affordable home in a time where 8.9% of our population live in unaffordable homes, that will not stand. So we need to do something, and I will work very closely with Commissioner Designate, Executive Vice President Designate Ribeira on these issues. Let me also just touch briefly on an area that I think is also close to your heart, which is energy poverty. Because there, I was surprised myself when I looked into the numbers. It's now at a stage where we have 10.6% of our population that were not able to heat their homes adequately last winter. 47 million people were freezing, basically. I mean, in Europe, we are a wealthy part of the planet. This is totally unacceptable. And we need to do something about this. Thank you.
Si vos services ont besoin.
I wonder if there's any need for help to combat this problem of state aid in housing. I've got a proposal. When it comes to social housing, the group could be acronym could be changed because there is just simply greater numbers of people now. When it comes to the short-term lets, Airbnb type lets, there's an increasing number of long-term rentals being changed into short-term rentals. This causes problems. It pushes up rental prices. There was a regulation on short-term rentals, and in your mission letter by the President of the Commission, she wants you to look into this. And we wonder, and this is the precise question, I'm asking you for a precise answer, whether you would commit yourself to a legislative solution to this short-term rental platform problem, yes or no, Commissioner Designate?
I will definitely commit to us doing more than we're doing now. So short-term rentals, okay, in one hand, obviously, there's also positive things to say. So in some regions, it's good for tourism, it gives flexibility. Actually, even some places, it probably is the reason why some people can afford to buy a home, because they can then rent it out sometimes, and that'll help pay the expenses. There's also regions that want more short-term rentals. So we need to be mindful not to hurt those possibilities. On the other hand, I'm sure you all know of examples of cities where short-term rentals has led to over-tourism, and even worse, it's led to outcrowding the people that would normally be living in these cities. So we have cities where people with normal income, a nurse, a police officer, a teacher, whatever, are not able to afford to live in those houses any longer because they're being bought up and used only for short-term rentals. That is not a very rational and certainly not a very moral way of conducting business. So we need to do something about this. First step has been done. There is legislation that has been approved and will be implemented, and in 2026 we will have the obligation to transmit the data needed to the public authorities by the different platforms in order, for instance, to use tax instruments and other instruments. Personally, I have to say, I'm not convinced that that is enough. On the contrary, I think I'm closer to where you are, that we need more action. And I'll be very happy to work with you if I'm confirmed in the Parliament, and of course with mayors and regions and national parliaments and regional parliaments on how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have finished the first round. This is the good news, and the bad is that we are 7 minutes behind the schedule. So now the second round, and remember, time is money.
Thank you very much. This also means I will be very strict with the time limits in the second round, reminding you all that there is 1 minute for questions and 2 minutes for answers, nothing more, and no follow-up questions. And we start with Wexler, EPP.
Designate, Mr. Jørgensen, welcome back to the European Parliament. Now, Europe requires a strong hydrogen economy to sustain its energy-intensive industries and to meet its climate targets. Now, the Delegated Act on Renewable Hydrogen was introduced without an impact assessment. However, it requires the Commission to carry out an assessment by mid-2028. Now, given the urgency of the hydrogen market ramp-up, what measures will the Commission take to perform a reality check on the Act's practical implications? Second, the draft Delegated Act on Low-Carbon Hydrogen has faced substantial criticism for its perceived complexity and investment uncertainty. What measures do you plan to address these main criticisms? And last, what is your strategic plan for the administration of low-carbon hydrogen with regard to the European Hydrogen Bank? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Wexler. Very, very relevant questions. There was also a lot of them, so I will try and get through them. If I don't, maybe one of your colleagues can ask a follow-up. But so hydrogen, extremely important for our green transition, as you said. Why? Well, one is that it'll work as storage for energy, and thereby making our energy systems more flexible. Second, it'll work to help us decarbonize the more hard-to-abate sectors. So you mentioned industry. Yes, so very high-intensive, high-temperature intensive parts of our industry will use hydrogen, steel, probably fertilizer, others. But there's also the necessity for hydrogen to be a part of our transport sector. So aviation, maritime transport will in the future also depend on fuels made with hydrogen as the source. Of course, you will have to add some biogenic carbon, but that is definitely a part of our plan. What to then do about it to make it happen? We are far from where we need to be. When we ask the actors in the market, it's a little bit of a hen and the egg problem. So you ask the companies that were supposed to demand, they say, well, we cannot change our production because the supply is not there. When you ask the supplier, they say, well, but there's no demand. So this is an area where we need to make sure that all the legislative frameworks are there. Probably they're not yet, so we need to work on that. The physical infrastructure also. So this is about storage facilities, this is about ways of transporting hydrogen and so forth. And then finally also the funding. This is one of the areas where probably, even though we would very much like, and in the future it'll be primarily private investments, and we would like that to also start the process, state aid is also very likely to be a part of this answer, and also EU funding to some extent to de-risk the investments.
Thank you. Nika, SND.
Domnule comisar desemnat.
Commissioner designate. I would like to talk on behalf of tens of millions of Roma citizens who fear the end of the month because the prices of energy are out of control. And we've all been exposed to doubtful practices. People have been robbed of their money, so we have over 370 complaints. My question is this: are you feared of this money made by speculators taken from consumers? And could this money be returned to those who have been the victims? Once again, it's money that has been paid illegally. Thank you.
So, Mr. Nika, Dan, my name, brother Dan. Thank you for raising this question because, so I mentioned a few times the problem of energy poverty. Your own country, I know, is also struggling with this, as are many European countries. And I understand the reasoning behind your question, that in a situation where we have energy poverty, people not able to warm up their own homes, people that are freezing, at the same time, you see actors on the market making a lot of money. Now, on one hand, we're dependent on having a market that is flexible, and that only happens if there's also a possibility of actually making money. So I'm not talking about fundamentally setting the markets out of its place, but I do think we need to have a much better implementation of the remit legislation that we have. Remember, that legislation should actually secure that there is always a competitive price that more or less reflects the demand and supply. Is that then the case now? Unfortunately not. ASA has been given a lot of more competency, and right now, actually, we have 345 pending cases. Not all of them are about market manipulation, but a substantial part of them are. So ASA and the national authorities have been given more muscles to deal with this problem. But I can assure you that I will, if I'm appointed, keep monitoring this, and I'm also quite willing to do more if we can agree on it and if it's necessary. Also, I want to just mention, maybe one of you will ask about that later, that there's also other parts of the Draghi report's recommendations that will help consumers get lower prices. PPAs, contract for difference, consumer empowerment, all of these things will lead to a decoupling of the prices in the retail level, not at the wholesale level, but at the retail level.
Thank you. Then Hansen, EPP.
Thank you very much. I will be speaking in our mother language. Thank you.
Here we are again, Dan. It's a pleasure. Last time it was in the Europe Committee of the Danish Parliament. Now, could you set out your position on the need for further market reform? We've got that ahead of the 2024 electricity market reforms, and we don't think there should be further reforms carried out before the current reforms are executed. And given the expected growth in renewable energy sources, what is your position on the development of cross-border market growth in the future? And how do you intend to address the concerns of energy-demanding industries because of the high prices that are demanded on the short-term energy markets?
I'll be answering in my mother tongue, Fynsk. Tak.
Thank you. Now, this is the first time I've got to call you Mr. Hansen, so thank you, Mr. Hansen.
Normally. Tak, Herr Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. That's a really good question. And I'm sure the reason that you're asking it in that way is that it's important to get some kind of a promise here, a promise that we won't come up with further legislation on the electricity market until we've actually got in place the reforms that we're currently planning. And this is a promise I would like to give you. Whether we are going to need more, it's very difficult to say. Primarily, the reason for that is that, and your group has been involved in this work, we're trying to simplify the rules, and that is very much at the top of our agenda. But the fact that we have got legislation that needs to be implemented, and that itself will bring down prices very low, means that we are going to have to get that legislation and its reforms implemented quickly. One example that I encountered in Sweden is that there are customers there who've seen their energy bills go down by 42% by choosing alternative energy suppliers on a free market. At the same time, I think it's less than 10% of the EU's electricity customers who've actually been able to benefit from the freedom to choose your electricity supplier. So there's quite a big problem there when it comes to the actual implementation of that legislation. You were asking about the physical aspect. Well, there's a market here, and there are rules for the functioning of that market, and there are systems that have to be in place, but there's also the physical cables and the interconnectors, etc. Time is passing. It's important that we do get that extended as well.
Check the Patriots.
Thank you, Chair. There is no doubt that the access to affordable housing is becoming a luxury in many cities. And you have also mentioned that in your speech. But I must add something to this, and it's not only rising property prices, high energy costs, but it's also Green Deal regulations that are putting housing out of reach for a growing number of people. And we are here to care for people. So I will ask a very simple question. What would you say to those people in many European cities, and also here in Brussels, who are forced to sell their homes because they cannot afford to pay for the mandatory green renovation that they are obliged to implement?
Okay. Let me start by saying that I acknowledge the problem that the investments in renovating a home can be a big investment. If you want a new heat pump instead of your gas or oil boiler, if you want better isolation. The good news is that it will pay back fast. Good news is that in most places, if you go to your bank, you will get a loan because the bank can also see it's a good thing to do. But not for all. So this is why your question is so relevant. I have to underline that the way the legislation is made doesn't mean that it actually needs to be implemented on the level of a family or an individual or a house. It's up to the member states to decide how it's implemented. But I also have to say that, well, it's our intention that it actually happens in the houses that needs it. And it's very closely connected to energy poverty also and the lack of decent housing, because 15% of all Europeans live in dwellings where it's not well isolated or they have other problems. This is not acceptable either. So we have European funding that cannot solve all of the problem, but it can solve some. We will double the money in the cohesion fund together with Commissioner Fido. I will work on this. This will add up to around 14 billion euros. We will work on a pan-European investment platform with EIB that will also provide funding. The state aid rules that we've talked about quite a bit also will help. There is also already more than 100 billion euros been directed directly to energy efficiency measures in buildings and houses. So although most of these investments need to be private, there is no doubt that there is also things we can do and have done on European level.
Donassan, ECR.
I will speak in Italian. Grazie, candidato.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Designate, for the wonderful discussion that we're having. You've touched upon two issues, energy poverty, family businesses, and the energy mix. Now, there's an issue here in Europe, very diffuse in nature, and that is trying to find some way of transforming energy, and perhaps through waste. So what is your view about the possibility of generating energy through waste, the sustainability of it? What sort of policies can be implemented there? What kind of technologies can be deployed as well? How efficient is it? It is a way to reduce emissions, and it serves the circular economy as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very relevant question. So there are many aspects to this, and Ms. Donazzini, I very much appreciate you raising it, because it is important and we do have a lot of potential. So there's the most obvious and also the part of our energy system that is now that is now functioning in this way. In my own country, for instance, we have waste incineration facilities that also produce both district heating and electricity, and if that's done with the right environmental standards, then that can be sustainable. On the other hand, what we want to do with our waste is create less of it, reuse it and recycle as much as possible. So that's the balance that we need to find there, obviously. Then there's the waste from our food sector and our agriculture sector. That can be made into biogas. And actually, in many countries, my own included, the ramping up of biogas production from exactly these waste sources has been a major reason why we've been able to cut down on our natural gas. And in the future, we will need these sources of what will then be green, biogenic carbon. Why? Because it's one of the only ways where we can have negative emissions. If you take the carbon from the burning of methane from a waste incineration, put it into the ground, that's negative emissions. Or you can add it to hydrogen and then make some of the fuels that we will need to decarbonize our aviation sector and our maritime sector. So that, I think, is something that we need to do much more to develop and support as best we can, both making sure that the legislative framework is there, but also that the investments are there. Thank you.
Van den Berry, Renew.
Ik stel mijn vraag in het Nederlands.
I'd like to put my question in Dutch. Mr. Jørgensen, thank you very much for your introduction. I think it was full of ambitious goals, and I think it's good to see that you appreciate the lack of housing. But there's, I think, a lack of urgency here and also ambition. You were talking about a dialogue that needs to be entered into on housing, and what I'd like to have from you is that the state aid rules, they need to be revised. In 2022, the Parliament repeated its earlier request for that to be done, and I think it's scheduled for 2025, but we can't wait that long. It's important that we get a fundamental dialogue before this gets to be a bigger problem. So can we have an assurance from you that there will be a revision of the state aids rule by 2025 so that the national governments will be able to put money towards fighting the lack of available and affordable housing?
Well, I'll definitely commit to us doing this as fast as possible. State aid rules are an important part of the solution, but I will also remind you that it's not the only thing we can do. And I also need us to be very clear in agreeing that even though, of course, naturally in this room we're discussing what can be done on a European level. But most of the solutions needed for this sector will be national. And this is why, yes, let's do whatever we can. I will lead that work, and I look forward to it. And I think we can probably even do more things than what I've suggested here today, because when we start working, when we have the dialogue, when we use each other's abilities, we will also come up with new and better ideas. But we need to also help each other put pressure on the member states. To your specific question, when will we reform the state aid rules? I can tell you that we've already had discussions about this, the Commissioner designate, Teresa Rivera, and myself, so we are ready to start working on day one. How many days it will take us to find a conclusion, I'm not able to promise you, but I can promise you we will work as fast as possible.
Vogelsang, SND.
Thank you very much, dear Commissioner Designate, dear Dan. Welcome back. Good to have you in these rooms where you spent so many hours as member of the European Parliament. I would like to ask you, with regards to your ambitious targets and goals that you mentioned in your introductory speech, in order to decarbonize, in order to become independent of Russian gas, in order to decrease energy costs, we need to look at the heating and cooling sector. That's 50% of our energy consumption, and 70% of that today comes from fossil-based fuels. So we need to speed up the decarbonization of the heating and cooling sector. And I'd like to ask you how you look at that, what you will do, to which solutions you will look at. Thank you very much.
I have to be honest with you, this is a little bit of a strange situation. I voted for that guy. So I'm happy to say I also agree with the sentiments behind your question. Yes, you're right. We need to do much more in our buildings in order to decarbonize our economy. An important part of this will be the electrification action plan that I will put forward. Because electrification will not be everything. Some places it'll be more district heating that will be the key. But many places it will be heat pumps driven by electricity. That, of course, needs to be seen in combination with also other sources like geothermal power, for instance. That can be some places an access directly for a building or via district heating for a whole area. Electrification has actually stagnated as a part of our energy system. If you look at the end consumption of energy, it's about 22 to 23% that's electricity. that stagnated in the last decade. I only found that out recently. I was surprised. I would have thought intuitively that it had gone up. It hasn't. So this is something we need to remedy. It needs to probably more or less double in size. How to do it? Well, it's many of the areas that we've already touched upon. It's strengthening the physical infrastructure. It's getting the investments in place. The investments, by the way, for the physical infrastructure is more than 500 billion from now to 2030 that's needed. So all of these things, it's a tall order, but it can be done, and it will be a part of our affordable energy strategy. It will be a part of the electrification roadmap or action plan that I will put forward. And of course, it will also be a part of implementation of the many directives that we've already passed in the European Union. The one on energy efficiency that you were rapporteur of is certainly one of them.
Kelly, EPP.
Ursula Jørgensen, you strike me as being an experienced, practical guy, which is what we need. So, while the 240 target is still to be confirmed, it is expected that will require significant emission reductions in the energy sector, with an electricity system that is either at or very close to net zero by the end of the next decade. Such an electricity system will likely operate and deliver prices differently to today's system, and with this in mind, we must prioritise certainty. Investors quickly need clarity on policy frameworks in order to make investment decisions on projects that have a 10-plus year delivery timeline and 30-plus year lifespan. So please outline the process and timeline for delivering the post-2030 climate and energy framework, and also will you commit to undertaking a comprehensive impact assessment, including detailed modelling, stakeholder engagement and competitiveness checks to inform the most cost-effective pathways to 2040.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I think you seem like a very practical guy yourself, so I'm sure we will work very well together. I also like the way you phrase your question, because that reflects that you are a practical guy. It's about implementation. How do we actually do it? We need to have a plan, yes, but that plan needs to be also one that's made in collaboration with who it is that we need to deliver, who it is that we're regulating. So yes, I will commit to engaging and having stakeholder dialogue all the way through the implementation, but also in developing the policies going post-2030. That also refers to Mr. Ehler's question earlier. Now, there are many things we can do to make sure that the investment enabling environment, as I think the investors call it, is better than it is today. You talk about security for investors, and I agree with you. It is a little bit of a paradox that quite often we see that there is a lot of institutional investors out there, pension firms and others, private money actually, that wants to be invested in the clean, green transition. But it doesn't happen. Why? Well, quite often, in my view at least, and I think this is supported by data, it's because of the lack of security for your investment. Now, since we know that there will be demand for clean energy in the future, there shouldn't be this uncertainty. Now, what can we do? Well, I think that also taking into account that we will never, as a union or with public money as such, pay for the whole transition, maybe the public money that we have from member states, from the European Union, should be used in different ways so that they best multiply the investments. That can be done, for instance, with de-risking. And this is one of the issues that I will also be speaking with the European Investment Bank about implementing.
Thank you. Bosanac, Green CFA.
Thank you. So, Mr. Jørgensen, if you will be appointed as a commissioner, it will not be an easy task in front of you, because you will be kind of price cutter commissioner. You have to cut the prices in the energy sector, but then also in the housing sector. And you already recognize that the problem of short-term accommodation rental is a problem, which was alerted years ago by many of the European cities. And then the cities tried to do something, and the response from the Commission was to launch pilot infringements against the states and actually working against the cities. So my question for you, are you ready to reconsider those infringement procedures and maybe even to end them? And are you ready also to do the structural change which you mentioned, to support the cities, not to perceive the cities as an enemy in solving the housing crisis, also in a way maybe to invest and invent new financial mechanisms such as maybe direct access of the cities to the EU funding. So are you also considering in that direction to deal with the cohesion funds?
What did you call me? Price cutter commissioner? I like that already. So if I'm confirmed, maybe we'll print some business cards. Seriously speaking, you touch on some very important issues, and the short-term rentals, I did speak about earlier that there are also positive things, so I'll not repeat that. Just be mindful that I also am very, very much aware of those positive elements. But it is a problem, and you are probably right. I think most people also in the Commission will agree that probably we haven't acted fast enough on this. Now, what I will do and what I will commit to is speaking exactly with the people who are affected. So if it is true what you say, and I don't doubt that you're right, that sometimes probably even citizens will see the EU as an enemy in this, that needs to change. We need to be on the same side of the citizens in this. What makes it complicated and difficult is, of course, that what some citizens in the region want is exactly what other citizens in the region want to avoid. This is also why there needs to be quite a bit of flexibility in how rules can be applied and how to tackle this problem. First step, I think, is very wise that has been taken, which is to make sure that we have the data that we need, that there's an obligation from the platforms to deliver the data to the countries. Also, I'm aware of the handbook that's been developed by the EU to support different actors, communities, cities, on what they can do within the rules, also with regards to the service directive. So it's not that nothing has been done, it's just that we need to step up and do more. I will depend on you and your guidance in also what that then exactly is, since, as I hope is clear now, it's not straight cut exactly what to do and how.
Thank you. Abadi Yahover, EPP.
Muchas gracias y gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Designate. In a hearing like that of today, I remember the victims and those people who have been left behind and who have fallen victim as well in Valencia. In this disaster and others like it, which have taken place in Europe, I would like to ask you, Commissioner Designate, that in your work you don't forget those who have been left without the most basic thing, their homes. We have to provide for those people. But I'd like to ask you about something which affects millions of property owners throughout Europe. In many member states, there's an increase in rent and illegal occupation of homes. How do you intend to deal with this particular issue and deal with the increase of occupation of homes in Europe illegally? Do you now, in order to deal with the causes of this particular issue, I think indeed we have to look very, very carefully to see where it all lies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. So occupation of homes, on one hand, obviously this is a breach of the right of the people who then owns the building. And there are all legal remedies to do something about this. But on the other hand, it's also very clear that sometimes it's very unfortunate situation where it's people that don't have a home and where the alternative is maybe being put on the street and become homeless. So, although I do obviously respect the integrity of ownership, there are also in all European countries quite strict rules on how to protect renters And we need to make sure that if they are not implemented well, or if the rules can be better, maybe learning from other countries that has better practices, that then maybe the EU can help facilitate that. What I do keep coming back to, though, is if we look at what we can actually do from a European level, it is providing the funding that we have been speaking about, making a housing construction a strategy that will hopefully make sure that we have more and thereby also cheaper houses. It's also about providing technical assistance and sharing knowledge, sharing best practices. So, for instance, in some countries, we also have rules that regulate whether or not, or how much, by the way, rent can increase to protect the renters. I hope I understood your question correctly. This is at least my answers.
Monsieur de Left.
Merci.
Thank you. Commissioner Designate, you underlined that electricity in Europe costs a lot more than in the US, in China. You said rightly that the price of electricity means that millions of Europeans are in energy poverty. 1 in 10 households have difficulty in heating themselves, which is unacceptable. So we need stable prices and close to the real production price, and cut electricity prices from those of gas prices and admit that liberalization has failed. My question is, will you propose a new reform of the electricity market so that we can have more public regulation of this strategic sector? The second question, because you mentioned geothermal, the European Parliament is in favor of this resource. Will you propose an initiative on geothermal? Thank you.
On the electricity market, I think actually the electricity market design does provide us with the tools that we need. So today, the prices of electricity follows the prices of gas. This is sensible in the sense that it's necessary to have the marginal pricing at the wholesale level. That's what makes it feasible to have new investments in renewable and cheap energy, but it's also what makes our market stable. It's what got us through the crisis. On the other hand, it doesn't need to be like that at the retail level. And if you use power purchase agreements, contract for difference, consumer empowerment, all of these tools that we have in the market design, by the way, also recommended by Draghi, then we will be able to remedy most of those problems as I see it. On geothermal, yes, I will commit to putting forward a strategy. Today, unfortunately, that is an untapped resource. Mr. Fuglsang asked about heating also of houses. This is an area where geothermal can definitely play a bigger role in the future. As I understand it also from the own initiative report that you wrote in this house, there's a concern that maybe there's not enough access to the subsurface data. I agree with that. We need to do something about that. There's planning issues. There's financing issues. This is also one of the areas where the upfront investments are huge, but the long-term costs are potentially at least quite low. So new financing models to make sure that we can accommodate the companies that wants to do it and the communities that wants to be at the receiving end of this, I think is necessary. Thank you.
Orjo Doin, S&D.
Thank you, and thank you for remembering our conversation when I said that the 3 most important issues in Dublin were housing. I want to ask about homelessness and about social and affordable housing, if I might. There is an EU commitment to ending homelessness by 2030, but it's on the rise across many member states, and I'm disappointed that the issue of homelessness is not mentioned in your mission letter. So what are your proposals to ensure we can end homelessness, and in particular, how will you scale up housing first programmes? And on social and affordable housing, what concrete measures will you present to improve rental affordability and access to social housing in the short term, in particular for vulnerable groups and students? What kind of measures will you propose to protect borrowers from predatory lending? And finally, what measures from a tenant's rights perspective can you propose to enhance protections against no-fault evictions, which often leads to homelessness?
Yes. You also said that you spoke more about me than your own wife. I didn't quote you for that in the speech, but it's true. You were, in fact, the first person I met in this parliament that really brought to my attention just how high on the agenda it is in your own country, but also in others. So, homelessness. We have about 1 million homeless people in Europe. This is totally unacceptable, obviously. People living without roof over their head, without the most basic of needs. Obviously, it's very complex reasons of why people end up in the street, but we need to do more. And we do have a target of totally getting rid of homelessness before 2030. Unfortunately, we're not on track. We do have a common European platform to deal with this, building on the Housing First principle that's been implemented in some member states, but not all. It's a principle that was developed in Finland, and they have very good experiences with that. It's not just about providing the actual roof over the head of the people as the first thing. It is also about that, but it's also about coupling it with social measures, with job opportunities, with creating a life for people. Many will probably argue, well, at face value, this is not necessarily a European competence. I will say, well, actually, it's a European fundamental right, the social pillar, to have an affordable home. So I would say it is. I do acknowledge then that many of the solutions will probably be national, but why not also exploit the fact that we have a common understanding and a common will and determination to do something about this on the European level, share best practices, also provide funding when and where necessary for social housing.
Thank you. Doshi from the Patriots.
Jørgensen, au nom des Patriots.
Above the Patriots and the Employment Committee, I'm just asking you the question, why, given the crisis in housing in our different countries, you continue in the same direction? Why are you sticking to your guns whilst that timetable is untenable? The average rent has gone up by 23% in the EU, and your crusade against nuclear power has led to an undermining of the rental market. So these are beset by high costs with millions of people unable to live a good life. So the question is this. Mrs. von der Leyen recently announced a plan for housing. But where's the substance behind that? Can you here and now tell us what the basic outlines of that would be? And there's this green timetable which is bringing our citizens and our economies into dire economic strait. And we've got a crisis, certainly in my country, in France. It's become a matter of national urgency, and the people of Europe demand a concrete answer now.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Maybe it's actually a good time for me to recapitulate and summarize all of the different things that we've talked about in housing, because you ask me, and I understand why you ask, what does it concretely mean? So there's plans and there's what does it mean? Well, I would say that it's about values, investments, rules, and knowledge. Values, all Europeans have the right to affordable housing. This is something we should all stand for in this house. Rules, well, the construction of new housing, and there will be a strategy for more construction, also needs for us to implement better rules for standards, things that are today given too much red tape for new construction. Investments, well, I've already mentioned a few times the pan-European investment platform, the need for more investments, also energy efficiency, the more than 100 billion already been applied, the 14 billion in the cohesion fund, the state aid rules that we need to change. So we are definitely ready to do concrete things also on that. And the last part, the knowledge. I really do think that knowledge sharing, technical assistance, both directly aimed at the citizens in order to empower them, for instance, as energy consumers, but also for cities municipalities, this will work. Many countries have good examples of what can actually be done to make it lucrative for investors to invest in social housing. Why not use those examples, combine them with some of our investment efforts, so there's money behind the words, so to speak, and make that into reality also. Thank you.
Thank you. Krutilek, ECR.
Chair, Commissioner-designate, let's come back to the nuclear. As you are aware, for ECR Group and for me personally, nuclear energy plays a vital role in achieving the climate neutrality. However, nuclear must not only be seen as important, as you said, but also must be treated equally as all other energy sources. And in particular, it needs equal access to financing. Regrettably, in the EU taxonomy, the nuclear energy is perceived merely as a transitional solution, and even your clean energy investment strategy is limited only to renewables, energy efficiency, and infrastructure. I noted well what you replied to Christoph Grudler, so I will focus my question on another element. Would you support revision of the EU taxonomy in order to confirm that nuclear is relevant also in the long term and is treated equally?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kuchelik. Thank you for that question. I do support the principle of technology neutrality with regards to decarbonizing our economy. This does not change that. I don't see it as the role of the European Union, and I think probably most people would agree with me, to fund, for instance, the building of a new nuclear power plant. The EU does fund nuclear activity, but that is primarily research and training, and I think that is a sensible way of doing it. Having said that, I do acknowledge that since we are cognizant that nuclear is a part of the energy mix and will continue to be so, then it needs to be also fully integrated in the energy mix. Then it needs to be also a part of our investment plan. So the clean investment plan that I will be putting forward will also deal with nuclear. And I will also today commit to making an illustrative nuclear program, so-called PINK report. You will know what it means. It's basically assessing the needs for the investments in the sector. And I will also commit to engaging in a structural dialogue with the industry on these issues. I hope that answers your questions.
Please, Renew.
Fossil fuels means that prices have been going up as well. Putin's war going out. We've sent money to Gazprom. I know the Commission has a plan for phasing out Russian gas, but now it's 2024. Den Jørgensen, we should have move ahead with green energy. Electrification is key to reach the goals. We need to have lots of green power for proper prices for citizens, for electric cars, and with industry which is electrifying. So we need to have a re-electrification to free ourselves from fossil fuels from Russia and to reach our climate goals. So what are the specific measures that we can expect, and when? Will you commit the EU to have electrification goals for 2030?
Tak for det.
Thank you. I will also answer in Danish. It's a really good question. If we could be free of Russian gas tomorrow, we would do that. It should be faster than at the moment. 2027, the current goal, I have a clear ambition to go faster. If within the first 100 days, I will present a plan for how that will happen. It's also correct that electrification is an important part of that, but it's also an important part of the longer transition that Europe needs. If we don't electrify our community root and branch, we won't reach the goals we want to reach. In 2040, more or less, we should have 100% carbon-free electricity sector. Right now, if we look at the actual consumption of energy, 22-23% is electricity. It's been stagnating for the last 10 years. It's not good enough. That has to be doubled at least, and it has to happen fast. The various barriers that exist, we have to address them. We have the physical infrastructure, our grids, the transmission nets. We need 500 billion euros in investments by 2030 in the grids, and we need the interconnectors between the various countries. It's digitalization, it's better possibilities for storage, either batteries or hydrogen storage. All these things are part of the work that we will do in the years ahead. Thank you.
EPP.
Thank you, Commissioner-designate. Thank you specifically for already underlining the importance of modernization and interconnection of Europe's electricity grids. We know that poor connectivity is causing ongoing price disparities and high electricity prices, especially in Southeast Europe, and undermining competitiveness and consumer affordability in countries like Greece, Bulgaria, or Romania. However, progress of interconnectivity is hindered by significant financial needs. Estimates suggest up to 63 billion needed investments annually. And meanwhile, we see that only a third of the available funds from the Recovery and Resilience Facility have been deployed so far. In light of these challenges, could you outline how you envision the future multi-annual financial framework supporting investment in grid interconnectivity, especially for Eastern Europe, while protecting consumers from potentially high costs? Thank you.
It's clear that southeast of Europe experienced some big problems this summer. Unfortunately, this is what happens when a heat wave hits in the combination of different factors. Not enough interconnectors, not enough storage facilities, not enough planning of maintenance. So there's no free flow, rational flow between countries of energy. What the Commission did was try to help facilitate and advise the countries with immediate effects for the citizens. But already on the short term and on the long term, we need more structural change. Interconnectors is a part of the solution, and the interconnector that will be finalized, if I'm not mistaken, in April 25 between Portugal and Spain will lead to a capacity increase of 3.2 gigawatts. Later, there's one coming between France and Spain, the Biscay Bay project, with an even higher gigawatt. So this will be part of the problem that is specifically directed towards that part of Europe. Then you ask about the new MFF. Difficult for me to answer, obviously, since this is to be negotiated. What I can say is that I hope everybody reads the Draghi report, because there's pretty clear where we need more investments. And I think probably also my personal view, EU funding is very well spent when we spend it where it also has a European purpose. And exactly the flow of energy across borders and making sure that the energy union that we have that is not functioning well now will function better in the future will be, I think, paramount.
Thank you. Geyer, S&D.
Thank you, President. Dear Commissioner-designate, dear Dan, welcome back to the European Parliament. You already mentioned earlier parts of the necessary framework for the ramp-up of hydrogen, so I will focus on one of the important tools for this ramp-up, the hydrogen bank. How will you ensure substantially more financial resources for the hydrogen bank with regard to supporting domestic production and imports of hydrogen? And what measures will you take to ensure the adequate functionality of the external dimension of the hydrogen bank and an active climate and energy diplomacy in order to diversify and secure supply? Thank you.
Thank you. One of my not old friends, but friends for a long time. Also old, okay, maybe. You raise a very important question. So the hydrogen bank is obviously under responsibility of my colleague, Commissioner Hoekstra. There's no doubt that we need to keep monitoring the auctioning criteria. And as I see it, the way that it is working now is going in the right direction. We have progress, and it is in fact living up to what we wanted to, but maybe not fast enough. Now, whether or not that is because of the way that we have set the rules, or if it refers to the problems that I mentioned earlier, which is that we also need the market to start working. And both the suppliers and the demand side needs to be mobilized. I think probably it's a little bit early to say. What I will say is hydrogen is such an important part of the puzzle for us to have a functioning, integrated, clean energy system in Europe that we cannot afford to not have 100% focus on speeding this up. We need to ramp up the production, so up in scale, down in price, better transport, create an actual market, and the hydrogen bank is indeed an important part of it. Thank you.
Moratti, EPP.
Thank you, Commissioner Designated. What do you plan to do to address the shortage of skilled construction workers? And how would you ensure that the administrative burden on companies in the construction industry, in particular SMEs, kept to a minimum in order to create more favorable conditions for a rapid provision of new energy-efficient and affordable housing? And what concrete measures at the EU level would you apply to promote public-private partnership? And do you plan to reduce unnecessary burden, energy efficiency burden, to reduce the cost impact on households? Thank you.
Thank you. You pose, Mrs. Moratti, a lot of very important questions. Probably I will not be able to answer all of them, but in the time that I have. But the burden reduction with regards to energy efficiency measures is not one that we've touched on. We've spoken a lot about burden reduction as such, mostly for industry, but it's also important with regards to energy efficiency. And actually, it's an integrated part of the energy efficiency directive. That it needs, it's a cornerstone in this directive that it needs to reduce the burdens. And with regards to energy efficiency measures and how they help bring down bills and costs of homes, obviously we've spoken a lot about the fact that you can bring down the bills of heating a home, bring down the electricity bills. That's important. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned now as a success story is the eco-label system that we've introduced in Europe. This has led to billions in savings for consumers. Hundreds of euros per household on average every year. So that is one example of many of things that we do that actually, bottom line, makes the economy of our citizens better. But as I've said a few times now, and something that I really stand by, we need to acknowledge that there is a risk that some people will struggle finding the finance to do what is necessary for them to do. I will argue, though, that that's not, so yes, it's European Union law that will make sure that it will actually happen because countries need to implement. But these investments are also good for the normal family in Europe because it'll bring down their bills and it'll make their house more affordable to live in and so forth. They just need the help to actually make the investment. And I'll also be talking, of course, to actors on the financial market on how to make sure that we have the right products to facilitate that.
Thank you. Benova from Non-Attached.
Thank you for the floor, Mr. Commissioner Designate. You have 5 difficult years ahead of you. This can be clearly seen also on the questions that are being put to you, and I wish you the best of luck. These 5 years will be difficult, not only for you, but for us as well, because we are here responsible towards the voters, so we will expect from you that what our voters expect from us, you will be fulfilling together with us. So, if I may, I will touch upon one topic that I consider equally as important as other topics, but I believe that on today's hearing we should maybe mention it more. According to the market signals and the Commission itself, the energy prices will go up in the following years, including housing costs and also rental costs. So I would like to know how to ensure that really affordable energy will be accessible to everybody, not just for certain selected groups that are vulnerable.
Thank you, Mrs. Benova. I think probably the reason why there's been a lot of focus on the vulnerable is that I assume that the people that asked the question, and certainly myself, we feel a special responsibility for the most vulnerable, as I'm sure you also do. But I also want to make it perfectly clear that bringing down the costs is for the whole of our societies. It's for the industry, our competitiveness, our companies. If our companies do not compete, create jobs and growth, all of us loses. It's the prosperity of our societies. And it's about the energy bills of all homes and all houses. And when I say what I think we should do, it's not just words in a speech or on a piece of paper. It's building on things that's already being done. So, for instance, the deployment of renewables, well, we are doing that very fast now. For the first time ever, the first 6 months of this year, there's more electricity generated from renewables than from fossils. And this saves people money. From 21 to 23, European citizens saved more than 100 billion euros because of renewables. This is direct savings for European citizens because of renewables. So, this is why this is not only something we do to fight climate change, it's certainly also something we do to fight climate change. But it's also something we do because it's the most rational thing to do if we want competitive societies with social justice, with equality, and where people with average pays and average salaries can live an affordable life in an affordable home.
Knotek, Patriots.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Mr. Jørgensen. Here I am. One of your entrusted tasks is bring down the energy prices. Recently reviewed electricity market design promotes the contracts for difference. That's fine. However, only for non-fossil sources. And let's be clear, EU is phasing out fossil fuels, but it must be controlled and a just process. And few EU regions still need to operate just for a couple of next years their coal and lignite plants and mines, because it's absolutely crucial for their successful energy and economy transition. They need and deserve stable environment for next few years. Therefore, Commissioner-designate, could you commit to amend without delay the electricity market design and corresponding state aid guidelines to enable contracts for difference also for some fossil-based electricity sources, of course under, let's say, very specific and time-limited conditions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knotek. I'm not sure I would agree that that would be a good idea, but I will say something different, which is that you mentioned regions in Europe that are dependent on coal and lignite. And I want to thank you for mentioning those regions, because in our speeches, when we talk about all the advantages of a transition towards a more clean energy system, we sometimes probably forget the people that will be potentially hurt by this transition, because there are regions for whom it will be difficult. And I think we need to be very, very clear in also providing answers for those people. How can we do it? Well, the European Union are helping via the Coal Regions Transition Initiative and the Just Transition Fund with funding. I think around 69 plans, quite detailed plans of what can be done to help reskill, to help create jobs, to help make sure that the people affected directly by this transition will also in the future be prosperous. It's also worth mentioning that there's also jobs in the green transition, and reschooling and training and reskilling, upskilling is a real thing. It's not just words on paper. It's something that can be done. We will have probably around 1 million jobs in solar in 2050, 500,000 jobs in wind in 2030, and many of those jobs will be able to be occupied by people that are today working in a fossil industry. It's important that we make sure that the jobs that we create are also for the same people that actually lose their jobs. So it's not enough to just say we will create more jobs than we will lose. If it's not for the same people, then of course they will feel that we are letting them down.
Thank you. Gonçalves, S&D.
Dear Chair, dear Commissioner Designate, thank you. I will speak in Portuguese. Hoje, o mundo tem os olhos na eleição histórica dos Estados Unidos.
We are looking at the historical elections in the US today. Commissioner Designate, if we were to have autonomy, your work in the years ahead will be important for resilience and energy independence. It's particularly important for companies and we can only do that if we have clean, cheap energy that we can store and proper infrastructure. We need a European Union of Energy. So my question is, what measures will you take so that we can have safe interconnectors and housing is one of the most important things to support young people in Europe. With winter ahead, I'd like to ask you, when it comes to the question of energy efficiency and those young people who live in energy poverty.
So the question about physical infrastructure of our transmission has been probably one of the ones that's been raised the most, and I totally understand and thank you for also mentioning it. Because if we don't have transmission, there can be no transition. And the needs are huge. So maybe, in order for me to not repeat what I've already said, I'll try and offer a new perspective. It's not only about strengthening and expanding. That is certainly necessary. But it's also about making a system that's smarter than the one we have now. So combining this with digitalization, so smart meters and smart grids, will be extremely important. It's also about exploiting the fact that we have millions of people in Europe that have their own batteries that could be a part of the collective battery for our societies in their cars. And if you combine that again then with the consumer empowerment and the right to choose when to use your energy so that it's cheaper, I gave you the example from Sweden where some people experienced a 42% lower bill than the alternative. If you combine all of these things, we really can make a much more competitive, a much more flexible energy system with, by the way, a lot of also energy security in the sense that we don't have blackouts. Because when we talk about energy security, we often talk about it with regards to not being dependent on imports, but energy security in the other meaning of the word deals with the fact that people need to be sure that they have reliant energy sources. This is at least as important as the price.
Thank you. Nukiel, EPP.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca. Szanowny Panie Komisarzu.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commissioner. I hope you will be our Commissioner. So looking at you and your rich political dossier, your expertise, I'm convinced you're a perfect candidate for the job. I'm sure you know how difficult, complex the energy situation is in our various member states. Let me give you two examples. Your country and my country, Denmark and Poland. Back when your country was moving away from fossil fuels, we were underway in our fight for freedom and independence. So we have done a lot already, but we require special assistance in our countries so that energy prices do not kill our energy-intensive sectors and our households. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In my not many years, but in my years as Minister for Energy from Denmark, in the Council I would always sit next to my Polish colleagues. So for that reason alone, I know a little bit about the Polish energy system, because we would often discuss, and I know I've also studied a little bit more in detail because it's so interesting, the transition that you're going through. You're probably one of the countries in Europe with the biggest challenge. It's a challenge for all, but the way you are moving away, at the speed you're moving away from coal to alternatives is quite impressive. So this raises issues, of course, of just transition as the one that we've talked about earlier, but it also raises questions of which technology then to deploy and how to do it. And there's no doubt that a part of the industries that you have that are very dependent on, that are very energy intensive, you need to look at them probably with a little bit different and more focused eye than the system as a whole. And excuse me if I'm becoming a little bit detailed, but I've spoken about these things in more general terms so much today that maybe it's okay if we move in a little bit on some of the practical solutions. One solution is that instead of having only a collective net, you can also have direct lines from production of energy to the consumer of energy. I don't know if this would be a good idea in Poland, but I can definitely say, probably you're nodding, probably it is. Definitely in my own country, you would normally say never move away from the collective transmission net with energy producers, but now because of the electrolyzer factories and the huge need that they know, probably we need to allow for also direct lines. Also tariffs with price signals that are rational in the sense that we can then create incentives to place the production closer to where we actually need, to where the actual consumption is also something that I think we should be better at implementing.
Thank you. Scuderi, Greens EFA.
Mr. Jørgensen, we are in a deep housing crisis, while more than 10% of the population is in energy poverty and a lot more are still struggling to pay their bills. Therefore, it's crucial to intervene on building efficiency and integrated renewable energies. On this, the EU must prioritize investing to support the most vulnerable and all those households that cannot afford the investments. So we have two specific questions. First, will you prioritize the implementation of energy efficiency and building legislation to support vulnerable and energy-poor citizens to access affordable, good quality and sustainable housing, and will you finance that? Second, would you consider setting up an EU renovation loan to assist in providing the capital funding needed to achieve a net zero building stock by 2050?
Thank you. So on the funding of the energy efficiency, specifically targeted the most vulnerable, there's no doubt that this is something that needs to be a part also of the affordable energy package and the investment part of that package. And working with the EIB, that has experience in this on making the pan-European platform, I will make that definitely a priority. Already, the EU has allocated more than 100 billion euros for for renovation, so investments in basically energy efficiency in buildings and homes. This is a lot of money, but it's clear that if we look at the combined need, it is far from solving the problem. Also, this is broadly speaking, so this is not fundamentally only directed towards the most vulnerable, but it's also, of course, directed to the most vulnerable. What exactly we will end up proposing in terms of models and tools for investments in the investments plan is probably too early for me to say, but I'll be happy to work with you on your idea. I'm not as sure I understood 100% what you meant, but maybe we can have a dialogue on that if I'm confirmed later, because I do think we need to listen to all good ideas. It's about de-risking. It's about making sure that the public money that we have are actually then making a difference. Since the public money, whether it's EU or national money, will never be enough, it's only a fragment, then we need to make sure that it then actually then leads to multiplying investments and serve not only in its own right.
Thank you. Van Dijk, ECR.
Ik spreek Nederlands.
I'll be speaking Dutch. Commissioner, I agree. Energy independence needs to be increased. Energy prices have to come down, and our climate goals also have to be attained. You said Mr. Grutter was a friendly man, but I don't think you know me. But Commissioner, if I'm looking at my electricity app at the moment, right now I can see that there are an awful lot of rules in Europe, and there's no wind, no sun. I can see nuclear power producing countries pumping it out. But the question is, how do you want to, how will we ensure that we keep existing plants? In America, nuclear power plants have been closed down for technical reasons, and in Europe it's for political reasons. So how can we put a stop to that?
I don't have an app like that, but when I served as energy minister in Denmark, I had by my desk I had a real-time screen showing how much wind were produced and when we were export and import. So there we would see, and this will probably make you happy. So I would of course be looking at all the offshore wind turbines and how much we produce, and in a good day we would produce 137% of what we need. So the green energy would go to other countries. But on a bad day, we would be importing nuclear energy from Sweden. So it shows you basically that all countries, more or less, in Europe, or I can say all, need to be a part of a well-functioning European system, integrated energy system. And I will say, so this started as a coal and steel union. This started as a union basically about energy, right? So it's a bit of a paradox that the one of the parts of our internal market that is not functioning really, at least not as well as we wanted to, is the energy part. So setting aside the energy mix, even though that's important, I think we can all agree that we do need to break down the barriers. So there's some legislation, there's some rules, there's some decision that needs to be made, but there's also some physical infrastructure that's simply not there. And this is why we have curtailment. This is why we have use of our energy that's not flexible enough, and thereby also increases the prices, because flexibility is not only about security of supply. Flexibility is also about bringing down the prices by using the energy when it's cheapest. Thank you.
Thank you. Devo, Renew.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Designate. For initiatives in terms of housing are of benefit to all, we must take account of financial aspects, but all physical accessibility for persons with specific needs. What specific measures do you envisage to promote the development of adapted housings for persons with reduced mobility, for example, for older people, when we have aging populations in Europe, but also those with handicaps, with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. We've talked about vulnerable groups today, but I think it's fair to say that most of the time when people have talked about vulnerable groups, it's been related to income. But there's also other groups that are vulnerable for different reasons, and one of them is, for instance, people living with handicap that need different physical structures for access, for instance. Not only access, also livability in a home. We have rules, a place, we have fundamental rights in Europe that needs to be implemented in all member states, but I would personally think that we need to do more to share best practices on this, make sure that we also monitor that the rights of these individuals are taken seriously. And I think that when we as a union have a specific eye for the most vulnerable parts of our populations, we need to also be quite deliberate in the way that we then define this and make sure that everybody understands that this is actually also different groups. You can't just talk about vulnerable parts of our population. There are different groups. So an elderly part of our population might have other needs than, for instance, some people living with handicaps. And I do think that needs to be an integrated part of our work in these issues, and I can certainly commit to it being also something that I will take serious in the dialogue that I will be taking with the whole of the ecosystem of stakeholders in the housing sector. I'll also be meeting with the organizations representing these different groups that you alluded to. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth de Left.
Thank you, Chairman. I will speak in Dutch. Commissaris, de noodzaak van publieke controle.
The need for public management of the energy sector is more urgent now than ever before. There is a threat to move production out of the EU down to high energy prices. There are thousands of jobs at stake, and I think this is a reflection of a bigger problem with the liberalisation of the energy market, which has brought about high prices and instability. We need longer-term solutions. So I have two questions. The free market has failed hitherto. We need to make sure that it is affordable for industry. What are the measures that you are planning in order to get control of energy prices in Europe and to ensure that the energy sector, the industrial sector remains competitive? Secondly, the development of public energy companies in order to produce green energy, which would then be part of providing surplus green energy for industry.
Yeah, so you state that the market has failed. On one side, I agree with you. On the other, I don't. Or maybe this is just linguistics. I don't know. But it's clear that when we have a market where the supply and demand does not always lead to the prices that should reflect, then there's a market failure. Now, that can be due to speculation. I suspect that it probably is, and this is why the reform of the REMIT regulation is so important, and this is why it's good that we've given ASA better competencies to deal with this, and we have 345 pending cases now. But the market is also sometimes challenged because we make decisions that are political.
Excuse me, is there a problem with translation? In French, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So we make decisions that are political and even moral, that leads to us needing the market to help us solve the problems. So when we decide to fight climate change, it's not something the market tells us to do. It's something we decide to do. We then need to make our decisions and make the rules in a way that the market serves us in doing that. Does that always work? Clearly not. This is why state aid is sometimes necessary. This is why EU funding is sometimes necessary. When we in Denmark built the first offshore wind farm in the world back in 1991, I can assure you the markets were not eager. Everybody said that's way too expensive a way of making energy. But because we supported it and others followed, today we have a market where offshore wind can compete in price with even coal. So that's an example of the market not working, but because we then took political action, now we're in a situation where the market is actually working for renewable energy, especially offshore wind. I don't think we disagree. I'm just being a little bit polemic here because it serves my point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've just finished the second round, so let's start the third one. We've got 4 invited committees, and on behalf of ENVI, the chair Antonio De Caro.
Parlerò in italiano.
In the response to the written question from ENVI, you said that accelerating processes for authorization is necessary in the energy sector for renewables and for decarbonization. How would you guarantee that this particular acceleration of procedures would take place, and how there would still be respect for environmental standards? How would be able to deal with this issue, reducing administrative burden and all the red tape in order to provide for the European Union the necessary energy of an environmentally friendly nature quickly? Thank you.
Thank you. So I used to serve in the ENVI committee for almost 10 years, have a special fondness for that committee, obviously. And thank you for bringing up the necessity to find, again, the balances. So our environment, our nature, is also dependent on us having a clean energy transition. If we don't fight climate change, then our nature and our environment will also obviously lose out. This is clear. On the other hand, it's also clear that the fact that we're going through this transition should never be an apology to then just leave aside any concerns for our nature and our environment. So when I talk about speeding up, I don't talk about compromising the protection of our nature. I talk about making it with less burdens, doing it faster. Sometimes there are good reasons for things taking the time they take, but often they are not. And we know this because we've seen progress many places where we've changed the rules and where we've changed the procedures. So even just the fact that some countries have a one-stop shop for making offshore wind. I mean, so instead of calling 17 different authorities and getting 17 different permits, 17 different forms to fill out, that's probably even low. You call one authority, and this is your point of entry, and they will help you. The authorities will be your help and your guide instead of people that will try and block something. This is the way we need to look at it. We've on a European level done a lot to change the rules. I will, if I'm appointed commissioner, revise the legislative framework to see if there's more we can do. Again, for it to take 4 years on average to get a permit for onshore wind, sometimes up to 7 years, 3 years on average to get a permit for solar, 7 to 10 years sometimes for offshore wind. This is unacceptable, and we can do better. But as I think the point of your question was, you want this also, but you want us to not do it on the back of environmental protection, and I agree with you. We need to respect that, and we need to work for that.
Thank you. On behalf of REGI Committee, Vice Chair Lubika Karvashova.
Yes, thank you. I read Denmark has the most affordable housing in Europe, so good credentials for the job. Listening to you, doubling the cohesion policy at the moment is the only existing EU source of funding for the European affordable housing plan, the only existing source. As I would bet, pan-European investment scheme and also state aid rules will take some time to be up and running, and that's not good news, to be honest. Cohesion policy have had a limited role on housing, both because of the eligible rules, but also narrow definition of housing investments. So 2 questions over to you. First, in the current uncertain regulatory context, how do you want to guarantee doubling the cohesion policy when EU funds have already been allocated by member states on different but relevant or equally relevant priorities? And secondly, how would you ensure that investing in affordable housing will not undermine the long-term goal of the cohesion policy, which is tackling regional disparities and achieve competitiveness for our regions? Thank you.
Yeah, so I will be working with Executive Vice President Fito on these issues, obviously. Hopefully we will be able to move fast. So hopefully you will see the effects also with regards to the cohesion fund, also in the short term. Having said that, you also asked some very relevant questions about the functioning of the cohesion fund and the criteria. And there a midterm is coming up, midterm review is coming up next year that I will obviously also contribute to. You asked more broadly also about financing, implying that, I don't know if you were implying that, but I heard it as if you were implying that maybe this would not be enough. And if that was what you were saying, I certainly agree. This is also why the Pan-European Investment Platform that we will be making in collaboration with the EIB will be extremely important. Be reminded that no matter how much money we are able to find of public money, it can only always be a help to mobilize more private money. Because the need for investments in new housing, to create affordable housing, to make sure that the supply is where it needs to be on European level is so big that I don't think anybody imagines the European budget will carry that burden alone. Having said all of this, there are of course also other things we can do, other tools, which has to do with changing rules that will then make it possible to mobilize more money. And many of you have asked about the state aid rules, and therefore I'll also just repeat again that it definitely is one of the things that we'll be looking at from day one, with Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera obviously leading that work.
Thank you. Time for the chair of IMCO, Anna Cavazzini.
Yeah, dear Commissioner Designate, on behalf of the IMCO committee, I would like to ask you 2 questions, or 2 set of questions. In your written answers to our committee, you basically said and underlined that the new strategy for housing construction in the single market will include a precise set of actions. You mentioned the development of new product standards, the digitalization of the procedures, dissemination of best practices, of course, and the improved access to construction services. Can you be a little bit more specific and give further information on the operational measures that you envisage, and also on the timeline? And secondly, as you know, and you mentioned it already, IMCO in the last term did the short-term rental regulation that will provide more data on short-term rentals, and a lot of colleagues mentioned today the problematic parts of it. You highlighted in your written answers that short-term rental services market trends can affect affordability of housing of local population. In light of this, have you already identified any systemic issues with housing rentals, envisaged concrete ideas how to tackle them, and how do you envisage to include stakeholders in that?
This is the short-term rentals is one of the most complex issues that we will deal with, because we have regions, sometimes even regions pretty close to each other. I would probably even say sometimes different parts of regions having different opinions on this. Because we need to be mindful that these platforms also have good things. They lead to more flexibility in tourism. Sometimes they will even lead to people being able to afford the home that they live in because they can rent it out sometimes. So it's also a part of the market of services. But on the other hand, and this is what really concerns me, it has led to prices rising in cities so that people need to leave their homes in order to give room for short-term rentals. I mean, this can never be acceptable. And although it is today possible for many member states to do something about it with tax incentives, with regulation and so forth, still it's also very clear that many regions, mayors, even governments are lacking the specific tools, they're lacking guidance, they are sometimes probably even afraid that they will breach European rules. So I want to make it a top priority for the Commission, as fast as possible, to look at, one, how is it going with the implementation of the legislation already approved that will lead to much more transparency and the data that we need, which is first step, for instance, if we want to make other rules for taxation nationally. And two, is there anything more we can do? I will definitely promise you that this is one of the issues that will be very high on my agenda.
Last but not least, the chair of Econ, Aurora Laluco. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner Designate, on behalf of the Econ Committee, two questions. Your mission later asked you to focus on attracting more private and public investment and to cooperate with the European Investment Bank in this regard to establish a pan-European investment platform for affordable and sustainable housing. Would you be able to already outline some key aspects of your approach to attracting investment, including the cooperation with the EIB and some core characteristics of the platform? And second question, how can you ensure investment reach vulnerable households and micro-enterprises, as mentioned in your written answer? Thank you so much.
Yes. So the EIB already has some experience and are providing between 1 and 2 billion in funding for social housing already now. So they have experience and we will be building on those initiatives. We also have some experience in different EU funding where, even though it hasn't been the main purpose, it's been one of the purposes to provide better accessible housing. So we will of course be building on the different experiences that we have. We will also be including other actors. So this is not only the EIB, there's also other financial actors out there on the market that might be interesting for us to listen to. And we will need to talk to the whole ecosystem of the stakeholders in the housing sector, not only the ones actually providing the funding, but also the ones benefiting, hopefully, from the financing. Because if we don't do that, we risk running into barriers when actually implementing what we need to do. Another principle that I want to mention is the principle of de-risking. Because again, the EU will never be able to, just as national funding will never be able to bridge the enormous gap that we have right now with regards to lack of funding. But we can, with the substantial amounts that we have, leverage a lot of private funding if we do it in a smart way. And de-risking of investments here is definitely one of the tools that we need to look at, especially if we're looking at bigger institutional investors that has a long-term investment frame. Then maybe it's not that difficult to put in place different frameworks where we can actually hopefully attract a lot of money, especially if we combine it with clean energy and energy renovation, which is also attractive to investors like that.
Thank you, and let's move to the final round, and this is the time for the left and Mr. Oliveira.
Obrigado, Presidente. I'll speak in Portuguese. Sr. Jørgensen, as
Mr. Jørgensen, what you propose for energy and housing doesn't correspond to what the demands are. It's not only those who are in a situation of poverty, it's also those who simply cannot find housing. And measures are not taken to deal with speculators on the part of in the real estate market. High energy costs as well. It's a problem for SMEs, for families as well, and the problem will be exacerbated if we have further liberalization of the market and if large undertakings take over the market. So we need additional funding for housing from the EU, and member states have to be able to increase what they can offer as far as housing stock to their populations. We have to simply have more homes. We have to have regulation of prices as well. Regulation also on the energy front in order to provide the energy that's necessary at a price that's accessible for people. Thank you.
Yes, well, I definitely do agree with you that the market is not functioning right now, so I guess you could say that there is a market failure. You didn't mention this directly in your question as far as I could hear, but it's also clear that we need to look into whether or not speculation is a part of what is distorting the market right now. I suspect that it is, so I'll be looking together with Commissioner Albuquerque on this, whether or not the financial market can be regulated differently. But then it's clear that many of the things that you can do nationally to make sure that the market is well functioning and to make sure that the special political ambitions that you have are fulfilled by the market, that is exactly something that you need to do nationally. So for instance, it's possible to make legislation if you want to say to a new contractor, if you want to build in this part of the city, X% of what you build needs to be social housing. That is something you can do. There's also countries that have legislation that prevents the rises of rents to go over a certain level, for instance, in connection with renovations. Again, a best practice that some other countries might want to apply also. On the funding part, I think I have answered that extensively before, but I'll be happy to repeat that the European Union will never be, even if we spend all of our budget, that will not solve the problem in Europe. But since we're not going to spend all of the European budget on this, even though we are going to allocate money, also more in the future than we are now, we need to spend them very wisely. So we need to spend them directed at what it is that we want to achieve, and we need to spend them in a way that makes sure that this is not just €1 spent, but it's €1 spent that will then generate 3 or 4 or 5 euros. Hopefully that is possible. It's not something that's unknown to the market. We know of these principles also in huge energy infrastructure investments, so hopefully that can be used also in the housing sector.
Thank you. Greens and Jutta Paulus.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Designate, for being with us today and answering all our questions. And thank you especially for your commitment to propose new targets for renewables and energy efficiency post-2030, because this is what we urgently need, and also to end Russian energy imports as soon as possible. Do you commit to include uranium imports from Russia, Russian technical support for European nuclear power plants, Russian participation in fusion research project ITER, and nuclear waste exports to Russia? my question is also, how does the commitment to lower energy prices fit in with new nuclear power plants, which are 3 times more costly than renewable energy? And given the long building time for nuclear power plants, how do you envisage they are supposed to significantly contribute to our 2040 climate targets, taking into account that even when doubling the originally envisaged lifetime, many existing nuclear power plants will be off-grid by then?
May I suggest that you go into a room with Mr. Grüttler and then you sort it out? And then tell me what the compromise is. No, but this shows you, of course, the polarization of the debate. I have to correct one thing. I did not promise a target on energy efficiency post-2030, but I did say that I will work for one on renewables. We will, of course, have to look at the impact assessments and stakeholder dialogue on energy efficiency to see what to do better there, but I'm not sure a new target is the right. I'm not excluding it, but I'm not sure it's the right thing, whereas I do think on renewables, it is clear that that will be a good way to work. On the nuclear fuel that you mentioned, I don't think we've spoken about this today, because that is also a real problem. So we speak about being independent of Russian gas, yes, but we also get nuclear fuel from Russia. So we need to diversify that. And in the process of making a new strategy for SMRs, maybe that's also good to be mindful of. Who do we make ourselves dependent of in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Renew and Anna Sturg.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Designate, over here. You've mentioned yourself the importance of massive investments in physical infrastructure, and we've touched on interconnectors and transmitters, but we haven't touched as much on energy storage and particularly on distribution grids. Now, the Commission itself in the Grid Action Plan has acknowledged the significant role of distribution grids for the European energy transition, thereby the increasingly European nature of this issue. Now, there's estimates that around 425 billion euros are going to be needed by 2030 for investments in distribution grids alone. So my question is, and I'd like to ask you to answer as specifically as you can, will you revise the 10E regulation to introduce something of a 10E light to make investments in distribution grids possible, or introduce another new budget line to help these investments? How will you enable the mobilization of private investments, of anticipatory investments that are needed here? And what other steps are you willing to take to enable these investments? And a cheeky side question, yes or no, will you propose a storage target?
Yeah, so I'm not able to give you the answers that you were probably hoping for, but I do agree with your analysis, and I do agree with where we need to go. So it's true that we haven't spoken that much about storage. Storage is also a very complex issue, since this covers both storage in the form of, for instance, batteries. And even that is complex, because that's also huge, big-scale batteries, and it's the batteries that we have in our cars, in normal homes. How do we make sure that we have an energy system that takes these things into account? Storage will also be hydrogen. So when you have energy production that succeeds what your demand is at certain times of the day, when we have electrolyzer capacity at a level where it's feasible and rational, you can then exploit that and then store the energy, and by the way, transport it as hydrogen. That'll probably be as ammonia, but nonetheless, that can be done. It'll also help us decarbonize other parts of our energy systems. So these are parts of the challenges that we are facing there. On the huge investment needs that you talk about, most of this needs to be private financed. And there could be public money engaged in this, yes, but that will then be primarily, in my view, and I think most member states will agree, when it's directly targeted and not making the electricity prices go up. Because right now, the prices of an energy bill is composed by three things: the price of the energy from the retailer, the taxes and levies, and the transmission costs. And imagine a situation where we actually manage to get down the prices because we do something about the taxes, more or less up to the member states often, and we do something about the deployment of more renewables and energy efficiency, which we're hoping to, but the prices don't go down because the transmission costs go up. This will, of course, not be the right way of doing it. Now, the reason why probably it will be possible to find, I would assume, private financing here is also because it's a pretty safe investment. It's long-term investment, but it's pretty safe. And the way you'll get the money back is, of course, via the tariffs, taking into account the responsibility that I just talked about with not raising the tariffs. But if you have a long-term payback, then that can be part of the solution.
ECR and Francesco Torselli.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak in Italian. Commissario.
Commissioner, good evening. In many member states, there's been resistance with regard to the energy efficiency of buildings and the directive that's been put together for that. So many people seem to be against that, and it seems to be affecting negatively vulnerable individuals and young people. So the transition may not be, the ecological transition may not turn out to be a panacea. Now, it appears that the necessary resources for all of this is questionable, particularly in view of the 2028 new financial framework that will come to the forefront. So I think we need more precision on this particular front. How will we strike a balance between the new green initiatives out there and providing for families that are in need? Also, the issue of incentives. Do you think a system is in place which is sufficient? Thank you.
First of all, I 100% agree with you that we need to be very mindful that when we give the speeches that we give, definitely when I give the speeches that I give, when I talk about, okay, so citizens saved 100 billion euros from 21 to 23 because of renewables. That is actually true. They did. It's also true that we save billions every year because of the eco-leveling scheme. It's also true that more than 100 billion euros that we've spent supporting renovation of buildings will lead to savings. And this is true. I mean, had we not done it, the prices would have been even higher, the costs would have been even higher. But for the actual people that are still getting bills that are too high, they will want more answers. So I agree with you on that. I've tried to convey some of the ways to do it today. I by no means think we have all the answers, but we do have things we can do. So one of them is decoupling the prices so that the electricity price doesn't follow the gas price in the retail level. Another one is, of course, making sure that we have the deployment of renewables and energy efficiency much faster than we do. Making sure that the way that the energy efficiency measures are implemented in countries don't hit most vulnerable groups. Actually, something that I haven't mentioned is that I'm also very mindful that the legislation actually puts an obligation on member states to identify energy poverty and to reduce it by 50%. This is a part of the legislation. So, although I acknowledge your concern and although I think that we need to take it very seriously, I do think we need to be careful not saying the legislation of the EU just provides more expensive and it's bad for the most vulnerable parts of our population, when in fact we have tried, you have tried, to make legislation that takes into concern these exact potential problems for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Andras Gyurk, PFE.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Designate, two issues briefly for further clarification, if I may. First, nuclear, once again. You've made clear that you respect the treaty and the member states' right to determine their energy mix. That's great, but it's obvious. The real question is the following. By what specific proposals do you intend to promote the principle of technology neutrality in the energy sector? Are you planning to draw up an action plan dedicated to nuclear energy? And what concrete investment support steps will you undertake regarding this energy source? Second issue is residential energy subsidies, which are in force in many member states. These often mean essential help for families to mitigate the impact of sky-high energy prices. Based on this, do you intend to maintain the practice of the Commission's regular proposals, suggesting the ending of the Hungarian overhead reduction scheme, or are you willing to reconsider it? Thank you very much.
On nuclear, I think this debate has shown very well that it is still a polarized topic. It was a polarized topic when I was a member of this parliament almost 20 years ago, and it's also been so in the many meetings in the council when we've had nuclear on the table. And very often it's polarized the debate so much that it's blocked for other decisions. What I will say about this debate today, and the many talks I've had with many of you before this hearing today, is that I hope and feel that there might be reasons for us to be able to move on, so that even though I acknowledge you say that it's obvious that I respect the treaty, obviously I do, but nonetheless, if it's so obvious, then it should be obvious for everybody that we should move away from the discussion on whether or not to have nuclear or not have nuclear. We have nuclear. It is a part of the energy mix now, and it will be also in the future. So how do we then move on to the more specifics? And then I'll be concrete with your answer. Sorry, with your question. I will put forward an illustrative nuclear program, a so-called PINK report, that will assess the different needs. I will make it also a part of the clean energy investment strategy to look at the needs for nuclear investments. I will put forward a program when and if that is deemed necessary and relevant after we get the recommendations from the industrial group that's working on SMRs now. Here, of course, it would be premature of me to do something now without listening to them. And that is about as concrete as I can get. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of SND, Yanis Maniatis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear Commissioner, the high and volatile prices that European citizens have had to pay for their energy and gas bills are in the forefront of our citizens' daily life. As you know, having to choose between heating or eating is daily reality for millions of people across the continent. What approach do you plan to take in tackling energy poverty? Will the upcoming action plan for affordable energy represent a clean, long-term response to energy poverty? Will the plan address the commitments to ensure EU-level energy efficiency measures and strong investments in renewables, coupled with targeted support measures for the most vulnerable, the poorer people, especially in renovating the worst performance buildings?
47 million people in Europe did not have the possibility of adequately heating their homes last winter. I mean, think about this. This is so they are choosing between eating or feeling warm. It is totally unacceptable. And we need to address this, and we need to address the energy poverty issue, not only as something that will be solved because of all the other things we will do. To some extent, that will hopefully be the case, because many of the things that I've talked about will also help remedy this problem. But that is not enough. We need a dedicated strategy, and the energy poverty issue will be also part of the broader poverty strategy that we as a Commission will put forward. So I'll be working with, if I'm confirmed, with my colleagues in the college to make sure that we have a holistic view on poverty, and that will deal with the factor that is the most expensive for many people when living in a home apart from the actual rent or mortgage. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last in this round, on behalf of EPP, Thomas Tobbe.
Commissioner designate, as the chair said, I'm the last one, so we are soon there. I fully agree with you that affordable housing is crucial for our citizens, but it's also very clear that the challenges are very different in the member states. So I would argue that it's quite hard to find an efficient European policy. So therefore I wonder, how do you plan to implement the principle of subsidiarity when developing the housing policy? Because I don't think that was really clear in your written answers. And lastly, on nuclear. I listened carefully. You have said that you cannot promise EU funding for nuclear. Fine. But I guess you are in favor of EU funding for renewables. You also say that we need to move on in this debate, and I fully agree with you. So therefore, my question is, do you exclude the possibility of EU funding of nuclear in the future? Yes or no? Thank you.
The subsidiarity principle is extremely important on all issues, but on housing, I think we will see that we need to be extra careful. And this goes for both sides of the question. So subsidiarity is often used in discussions, and rightly so, but it's mostly used when somebody thinks that the EU is imposing something on a nation state that would be better solved there. But actually, it refers to the fact that you need to make the decision where's best made. So sometimes it also means that it's actually better to make it at a central level. So it goes both ways. I do think that many of the things we need to do from a European level will have to do with sharing best practices, knowledge, technical assistance. I haven't mentioned yet the European semester, but the European semester is also an opportunity to monitor the housing markets and thereby also maybe give recommendations to countries. I think it's very clear also that looking at the different ways that countries use taxation, the different ways that they regulate their markets, surely there must be a way to do it more rational, also seen from a European level. On nuclear funding, I'm not going to be making any revolutions, although I think you would probably want me to. It is not the job of the European Union to in my view, use our funding to support, for instance, a new nuclear power plant. We will look at nuclear energy as a carbon neutral part of our energy mix. We will also make it a part of the clean energy investment strategy, and I've also given a commitment today to make an illustrative nuclear program that will assess the needs. And hopefully that will also provide the data and the knowledge that we will all need to make the conversation that we have all talked about is necessary more feasible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as was said, we are almost done, but only almost. And I would now like to give the floor to the Commissioner designate to make a brief closing statement of no more than 5 minutes.
So Mr. Ehler did not believe me when I said I was looking forward to these couple of hours. I was. I do admit I had some butterflies in my stomach. But I will say, again, honestly, thank you so much for this exchange. I feel that it has not only been me answering questions, being tested by you, certainly that has also been the case, but it's also been an opportunity for you to send signals to if I'm then confirmed, then me, of what to expect for the collaboration in the years to come in the next mandate. it truly has been a pleasure to see your dedication, but also the level of knowledge. I'm not surprised, since I used to be a member of this House myself, and some of you were even my colleagues then, and I've come back often, so I know that you are indeed experts on your different fields. But I'm just very proud that maybe also people behind their screens at home have been able to watch and see that you are indeed not only representing the values of the people that have elected you, you also do it with integrity and a very, very high level of expertise. So I'm not only saying this to suck up to you. I am saying it because I mean it. So thank you so much for that. Now, can I just be a little bit more serious? So we haven't spoken that much about Ukraine. I've visited Ukraine twice during the war, met people who have lost, met people who have lost people they love, people who have lost their homes, people who have been living without the most necessary things that we consider ordinary parts of our lives, electricity, heating. And this goes on. Since March this year, Ukraine has lost electricity capacity equal to that of the collective capacity of the Baltic countries. Since March, they've lost 2/3 of their electricity capacity overall since the start of the war. EU is already doing a lot. We've contributed with more than 2 billion for help in the electricity sector and energy sector. But I think we can do more, and I think we should do more. And I will definitely commit to me, if I am approved, taking this extremely serious and having it as one of my main priorities, to stand by Ukraine, to help them through what will most likely be a very tough winter. With those words, all EU institutions are important. The Commission that I hope to serve, the Council that I have served, but only one is directly elected by the people. So therefore it's only fair that you're the ones deciding whether or not I get this job or not. I hope you'll say yes. If you do, I can promise you a very close collaboration. I will listen, and I will expect you to guide me in the many difficult challenges that I will then face. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank all members who took part in the hearing for your questions, as well as to Mr. Dan Jørgensen for his replies. An evaluation meeting will be held in camera at 18:30. And also thank you to Mr. Budka for co-chairing the hearing. And I will now give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. We were exactly in time, so this is maybe the first time we are just in time, so congratulate to you and to our members. Thanks a lot, and the meeting is closed.